Before we continue, subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in comments. I love reading your comments. What if Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, decided to transform his country into the beating heart of cashew nut farming for export to the entire world? At first glance, the idea may sound simple, almost too simple. Cashew trees already grow across parts of West Africa. But what makes this scenario different is not just planting trees. It is about building an empire of agriculture, one designed to rival cocoa in Ivory Coast or coffee in Ethiopia. The cashew nut is small, yes, but hidden inside it is a multi-billion-dollar global market, and whoever controls that market controls influence far beyond agriculture. So, imagine Ibrahim Traoré making this move, not as a farmer, but as a strategist, as a leader who knows that sometimes the soft power of food can be stronger than the hard power of armies. The story begins with land. Burkina Faso has it. Vast stretches of fertile soil in the south and west of the country can be turned into orchards of cashew trees. Traoré could call upon his people, especially the youth who are hungry for work, to join in this national project. Instead of young men leaving the country to search for uncertain futures in Europe, they could be given pride and purpose at home, working in fields that do not just feed families, but fuel an entire economy. Step by step, cashew trees would spread across the horizon like soldiers of a silent revolution, each one holding the promise of jobs, trade, and prosperity. But farming alone is never enough. Here is where Traoré's vision would take a deeper shape. West Africa has long suffered because it exports raw products without processing them. Cocoa beans leave the continent, but chocolate factories remain in Europe. Coffee travels across oceans, but cafes thrive in the West. Cashews, too, have mostly been exported raw to India and Vietnam, where factories process and package them before sending them to supermarket shelves worldwide. If Traoré wanted to change the game, he would insist on building those factories in Burkina Faso itself. Imagine entire industrial zones dedicated to cleaning, roasting, and packaging cashews, creating a chain of value that stays within the borders of the country. The economic impact would be staggering. Burkina Faso, one of the poorest nations in the world, could suddenly find itself exporting not just raw nuts, but finished products. That means more revenue, more taxes, more infrastructure, and more power for the state to reinvest in schools, hospitals, and roads. Farmers in small villages would see their lives transformed. Instead of struggling to survive on low incomes, they would earn steady profits from a crop that has global demand. Mothers would send their children to school with full bellies. Young people would no longer dream of dangerous desert crossings to Europe. They would dream of building businesses connected to this new agricultural empire. But with growth comes attention. The world would not sit quietly while Burkina Faso rose through the ranks of global cashew suppliers. India and Vietnam, the current giants of cashew processing, would see their markets threatened. They might respond with lower prices, trade barriers, or attempts to keep African cashews raw. Western companies, who have long enjoyed cheap imports, would face a choice: adapt and invest in Burkina Faso, or risk losing access to one of the fastest-growing hubs of agricultural power. China, too, always searching for food security, might look at Traoré's project with interest, offering investments and loans in exchange for privileged trade. Suddenly, the humble cashew nut becomes a chess piece in the game of global politics. This transformation would not only change Burkina Faso, it would ripple across Africa. Neighboring countries like Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria would see the opportunity and join in, creating a West African cashew belt that could rival any agricultural region on Earth. Instead of fighting over borders and resources, these nations might unite in agricultural alliances, strengthening their bargaining power against international buyers. For the African continent, long exploited for raw goods, this could be the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where Africa decides the price, the terms, and the future of its exports. Yet the challenges would be immense. Cashew trees take years to mature, and patience is not always easy when people are hungry now. Droughts, pests, and climate change could threaten the dream. Building factories requires not just money, but expertise. And foreign investors may not always share Traoré's vision of self-reliance. Corruption could creep in, and powerful elites might seek to control the profits for themselves. For this reason, leadership would matter more than ever. Traoré would need to stand firm, ensuring that this cashew revolution remains for the people, not for the pockets of a few. Still, imagine the symbolism. A nation often dismissed as poor and landlocked could rise to global importance through something as ordinary as a nut. International headlines would begin to change. Instead of stories of coups and poverty, the world would speak of Burkina Faso as the cashew capital of the world. The people, once overlooked, would now walk with pride, knowing that their soil produces something the world cannot ignore. And beneath it all, Traoré's reputation would grow. He would not just be a captain who led a military transition. He would be remembered as the leader who planted trees that changed history. But as always in global politics, power attracts both friends and enemies. If Burkina Faso suddenly held the keys to a significant share of the global cashew trade, could it truly keep control? Would Western corporations allow Africa to dominate a market they once ruled? Would rival nations try to destabilize the project before it matured? Or would the success of this vision inspire a wave of independence movements across Africa, as other leaders looked at Traoré's example and realized that prosperity is possible without Western dependency? The answers are not clear. What is clear is that a cashew nut, so small and fragile in the palm of your hand, could become the seed of one of the greatest economic transformations in African history. And if Ibrahim Traoré has shown us anything, it is that he thrives where others doubt, and he dares where others hesitate. The world would not remain silent as Burkina Faso rose through cashew farming. At first, many nations might applaud Traoré's bold step, calling it a symbol of African self-reliance. Speeches in international forums would celebrate the story of a small, landlocked country daring to challenge global trade patterns. But beneath the applause, there would be unease. Western powers, long accustomed to cheap African raw goods, would quietly worry. If Burkina Faso succeeded, if Africa truly began processing its own crops, then decades of dependency could unravel in just a few seasons. In India and Vietnam, leaders of the cashew industry would feel the tremors first. Their economies had spent years building factories, training workers, and securing their place as the world's cashew processors. For them, Burkina Faso's rise would not be a distant curiosity. It would be a threat. Newspapers in Asia would warn of African competition. Governments might offer subsidies to their own cashew companies, trying to keep prices low and discourage buyers from shifting to Africa. It would become a silent battle of survival, fought not with armies, but with price wars and trade deals. Meanwhile, China would watch with interest. Unlike the West, China has often been quicker to invest in African industries, offering loans and infrastructure projects in exchange for long-term access to resources. The idea of Burkina Faso becoming a cashew hub might fit perfectly into China's Belt and Road vision. Imagine Chinese-built highways carrying cashews from rural Burkina villages to new ports on the Atlantic coast. Imagine cargo ships sailing from West Africa directly to Shanghai, filled with African-branded cashews packaged in Burkina Faso factories. For Traore, this would be tempting, partnerships that bring money and technology. Yet it would also be dangerous, for dependency on one giant power could easily replace dependency on another. Inside Burkina Faso itself, the cashew revolution would bring both joy and tension. Villages once forgotten by the government would suddenly find themselves at the center of attention. Roads would be built where none existed. Schools would rise where children once studied under trees. And electricity would hum into homes powered by profits from cashews. The people would feel a pride they had never known. But as wealth grew, so would inequality. Those with land would profit first. Those with connections would secure contracts. If not carefully managed, the dream could create new elites while leaving others behind. And that, in a nation where poverty has been widespread, could sow anger instead of unity. But Traoré's vision, if he held firmly to it, would not just be about profit. It would be about dignity. For decades, Africa has been described as a continent of raw materials, gold, oil, cocoa, coffee, all flowing out, while finished products flowed back in. Cashews could change that story. If Burkina Faso succeeded, it would prove that Africa could rise not just as a supplier of resources, but as a producer of global brands. Just as Swiss chocolate and Italian coffee carry prestige, imagine packets of Burkina cashews on supermarket shelves in Paris, New York, and Dubai. Each one would carry a message: Africa can stand on its own. Globally, the ripple effects would be profound. If one African country could build a successful cashew empire, why not others with different crops? Ghana might decide to process all its cocoa at home. Ethiopia could insist on exporting coffee only as roasted beans. Nigeria could invest in massive palm oil refining industries. Slowly, the chains that tied Africa to foreign dependence would weaken, replaced by industries that kept wealth within the continent. The West, seeing this shift, might scramble to respond. Some corporations would adapt, opening factories in Africa to stay part of the supply chain. Others would resist, lobbying their governments to keep tariffs or restrictions on African exports. In boardrooms and government offices far from Ouagadougou, men and women in suits would debate a question they never thought they'd face. What happens if Africa no longer plays by our rules? For the Burkina people, this transformation would not be without sacrifice. Farming cashews requires patience. A tree can take 3 years to bear fruit, and in those years, farmers must trust that the dream is real. Families might struggle before the benefits reach them. There would be stories of disappointment, of trees that withered, of harvests ruined by drought. And yet, over time, the fields would grow green, the factories would hum, and the promise would take root. The people would see that wealth does not arrive overnight. It grows like a tree, slowly, but with strength that can outlast generations. And Traoré himself, his image would evolve. He would no longer just be the young soldier who led a coup. To his people, he would become the planter of a new Burkina, a leader who dared to look beyond weapons and wars, and instead chose seeds and soil. The world would watch, some with admiration, some with suspicion. His speeches at the African Union or the United Nations would draw attention, not because of military might, but because he held the story of transformation in his hands. But perhaps the most powerful change would not be economic or political. It would be psychological. For too long, Africans have been told they must look outward for solutions, that their salvation lies in aid, loans, or foreign approval. A cashew empire built by their own hands would shatter that illusion. Children growing up in Burkina Faso would not just dream of leaving. They would dream of building, of exporting, of competing with the world on equal terms. That kind of belief, once planted, is harder to destroy than any crop. Still, the story does not end neatly. Global power never shifts without resistance. There would be attempts to undermine the project. Sudden reports criticizing Burkina Faso's human rights, international pressure, even whispers of destabilization efforts. Because when a poor country suddenly threatens the profits of powerful players, history tells us they rarely escape unchallenged. The question would be, could Traoré and his people withstand the storm long enough for their cashew trees to bear fruit? And so, as we step back and imagine this world, we see that the story of cashews is not about nuts at all. It is about power, independence, and the courage to dream differently. A small seed, buried in African soil, could grow into a tree whose shade covers not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa. It could teach the world a lesson long forgotten, that true power does not always roar like cannons. Sometimes it grows quietly in orchards, harvested by the hands of ordinary people. If Ibrahim Traoré ever dared to plant this vision, the outcome would be uncertain. Perhaps it would succeed, reshaping Africa's role in the global economy. Perhaps it would falter, crushed by forces too strong to resist. But either way, the attempt itself would matter. For it would show the world that even the smallest seed in the hands of the brave can hold the weight of a nation's destiny. And maybe, just maybe, the future of Africa lies not in gold or oil, but in something as simple, as humble, as a cashew nut. Subscribe for more videos. Also share your thoughts in comments.